Hey everyone, it's Tali from the AstroTwins, and I'm here with Rick Levine. How's it going, Rick?
It's going.
Yeah, see, you are all the way in Bali and stayed up till midnight to talk to us. For those of you who don't know Rick, which is probably very few of you out there, you've been reading his daily horoscopes for over 20 years on Yahoo and Huffington Post and LA Times, right? And
And
no,
Tarot.com and LA Times. If there's anyone still there.
MySpace. Oh my! And also your books that you wrote every year for Barnes and Noble. You've been one of the insane astrologers who can just write that content for and no wonder you're in Bali now. It's like, okay, I think I'm gonna I'm gonna need a long Balinese nap myself soon from 20 years of dailies writing. But it's, we can't stop ourselves, can
No,
we?
the problem is I get to Bali and I'm just as busy or busier than I am. I mean, I love being here, but it's just a change of venue. Instead of the rain of Seattle, it's the rain of Bali right now. It's very
Right.
rainy. It's beautiful here, though.
And you'll be seeing the annular solar eclipse too. And
In Singapore, that's right, next week.
God, that's amazing. So by the time this airs, you will have gone through a whole, seeing the eclipse and figuring out, we'll be stepping into the new decade. So we're going to talk about Saturn today. I always love hearing what you have to say about Saturn. And you've been referring to Saturn as the keeper of the gates, I know. Can you say a little more about that?
Well, yes. Saturn's job is basically he is the designated gatekeeper. And gates to us modern folks are just no big deal. But if you were living 5 or 6 thousand years ago and you were living next door to Steve Jobs, instead of inventing an iPad, he would have invented the hinge,
Mm,
because the hinge basically gave us the ability to maintain the structure of a wall and open it, walk through it, have the gate close, and still have the structure maintained. It's prior to that, walls were, you couldn't take them down. You couldn't do, you were either stuck on one side or the other. Period. And so we moderners just don't get it. And Saturn's job is the keeper of the ultimate wall, the wall between here and there. In Greek or Hellenistic astrology, or in Greek, actually in the Neoplatonic thought, when a soul was reincarnating and coming to Earth, it came first through the gates of Saturn, and
ah,
then through Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, the sun, the moon, and boom, here on Earth. And this process was the same process when you pass, when you die, you go through that same thing. And ultimately, when you pass through the gates of Saturn, Saturn is the Grim Reaper. Saturn is Father
right.
Time. Saturn is the end of the road. And here's an interesting thing, because etymologically, and we'll say a little bit more about this a little later, but etymologically, Saturn and Satan are not different,
Mm,
because in fact, it was Lucifer who was the fallen angel, and an angel was in metaphysical realms, non-physical,
right.
and Lucifer fell through the gates of Satan, or Saturn became physical. And so the process of going from metaphysical to physical, or from unreal or imaginary to real, is basically that Saturn's job. And what we moderners also don't realize was that, going back to time immemorial, that to the ancients, when they watched the skies at night and they watched what we call the sun, the moon, and the planets, what they call planeta, which were just wanderers, when they watched these things wandering through the starry sky, the slowest rhythm, the slowest beat, the lowest note, the bass note, if you will, was Saturn. There wasn't anything slower than Saturn that moved. Once you went past Saturn, you were on the fixed sphere of stars. And so Saturn again was the beholder real, that which was animated, that which was alive, and that which was out there and did not move and had no movement at all.
Right. And then there's the outer planets now that we can see them, you know, which
And
are.
that's an interesting thing because well, first of all, when Uranus was discovered, it blew people's minds because all of a sudden the real estate of our little neighborhood in the solar system, which had been contained by Saturn, it tripled.
Right.
It went from 30 years to 90 years, or 29 years to 84 years. And so so Uranus was a shocker. It's the planet of shock. It was
Right.
shocking. And when Uranus and then Neptune and then Pluto, and now, NASA tracks over 500,000 things going around the sun. That's crazy.
The
You know,
exoplanets and the, yeah.
all right. So here's the thing. The thing is that as asteroids were then discovered, and then centaurs, and then Oort bodies, and and all these other things that are in our neighborhood, what's happened is that that the things that were not perceivable, they were imperceptible. Saturn was the limit of our senses.
Right.
And then as Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and other things began to be discovered with technology, with the telescope, we began to realize that the three-dimensional world was not the only world. And here it's really interesting because there was a French chemist who was the first president of the French Academy of Sciences back in the 18th century, in the late 1700s, around the time when Uranus was discovered, and around the time of the American and French revolutions, Uranus being the planet of independence and freedom. So this guy named Lavoisier is credited with discovering oxygen. But what he really discovered was that there could be something that was invisible that had substance.
Right.
And he proved that fire consumed the substance of oxygen. Prior to that, there was no knowledge of it. There were just, it was air.
Right.
The air was invisible. But the idea that invisible things could have substance was a shocker, just like Uranus being a shocker. And what this did is this set in motion a movement that is really just culminating now. But over the past 100 years, what's happened is that the imaginary, the non-physical, has become more important than the physical. And I'll give you a quick example. Wealth used to be in the realms of Saturn. Wealth was what? Real estate.
Money. Right. Oh, land. Yeah.
Real. It was stuff. It
Mhm.
had to have substance. And now the wealthiest people in the world are people who own portions of the electromagnetic spectrum. They own nothing real. They're the Bill Gateses and the and the telecommunication giants and the Googles, and what do these people own? They own
Airspace. Yeah.
vibrations.
Oh,
They
true.
own vibrations.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen is a shift of power from the three-dimensional world into the world that's outside the realm of perception, of direct five-dimension or five senses.
Which is
And,
where
and
Saturn draws that line. And for those who are newer to astrology, you know, all the planets have an association with them. So after Saturn, Uranus rules more of the metaphysical, higher mind. And then
Neptune, dreams and imagination. I
yeah.
mean, all the outer planets are not physical. They're
Yeah, Pluto's
power.
the secret, the unconscious, the things that are hidden, right? So,
And all of these invisible forces, in some ways, are, as the Buddhists knew thousands of years ago, they're the things that create the physical forces.
right.
And so it's we in the Western world have had it backwards. We thought that physicality evolved until we developed brains and then got consciousness, when the fact of the matter is it's the other way around. consciousness created matter. But that's a digression. Coming back to Saturn, I want to talk just for a moment about the English mystic poet William Blake.
Right.
William Blake created a whole mythology, and he created names for all the gods that he created in his mythology. And the god that was the kind of his replacement for the Judeo-Christian god who wore long white robes and had a long white beard and was usually pissed off for some reason, his name for that god was it was spelled Urizen. It looks like Urizen, but it actually is a play on the words your reason,
Ah,
which
uh-huh.
which was Saturn, because Saturn is the limit of thinking. It's the limit of anything. Now, here's what feeds into this is the symbol for Saturn, which let me share my screen just
Sure,
for a
yeah.
quick second. Um,
Always
and
good to have the visuals. Yep.
I'm going to just really, really, really quickly here bring up a screen. Am I sharing? Can you see the
Yes, you
screen?
are. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, then let's do this. Um, and there we go. Okay. So here we're now looking at a picture of Saturn, the ringed planet. And as you said, every planet has its own mythology. And Saturn is normally associated with tests and with constriction and with resistance. Saturn is the planet that holds us back so that reality is crystallized. Now, here's the crazy thing. The symbol for Saturn is actually made up of two separate symbols. It's made up of the symbol of the cross, which is we know as the symbol of Christianity, but it predates Christianity, and it's actually often referred to as the cross of the material universe, or the cardinal cross, the cross of north, south, east, west, or in astrology, the ascendant, midheaven, and their opposite points.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this cross of the material universe represents that which we can perceive, because the 90-degree angle is the angle of maximum interference with vibrations, and that manifests what we see as reality. Reality is basically the result of intersections of incredibly high frequency electromagnetic vibrations that create nodes, knots. And those nodes make the illusion of reality. Albert Einstein once said, reality is an illusion,
Mm-hmm.
albeit a very persistent one. So, so Saturn, the cross, becomes structures and 90-degree angles, squares. And we literally, as we go through life, things bend us out of shape. But we always want to come back to make that 90-degree angle. Now, the other
Right.
half of the equation is what looks like a backwards S. And this really represents the sine wave, the moon, the rising and the falling. If you turn that on its side, it would be the rising and the falling of the tides. And this represents constant change. And so, in effect, the symbol of Saturn has cycles of change that are nailed to a cross.
Uh-huh.
And if you take that symbol of Saturn and you flip it, you end up with what looks like an ST. And here's where the shit gets crazy.
I was gonna
Because
say.
because because when you look in the
Oh,
dictionary, all the Saturn words that, and this list goes on
oh,
forever,
this is
all
fascinating.
that's what, see, Saturn is it's resistance,
Stop.
it's stone, it's
Yeah.
steady, it's austerity, it's stamina, it's constriction, it's tests, it's, I mean, it's
That is sort of
crazy.
the noise you make when you're like, all right, I'm gonna loosen up here, and then the T just
Stop.
stops you. Yep.
All right. So it's also first and last, and the laws, the limitations, the statutes of state, and even a postal street address and stop and start. But now here's the craziest thing, and that is Nouns are things. You know, you're a nice person. This is a hot climate.
Mm. Hmm.
Whatever. That's a big room. But adjectives describe the room. You know, the things: big, green, nice. Those are all adjectives. When we have multiple things and we compare them, we say that one's bigger, this one's nicer, that one's hotter. But the of Saturn defines the limit.
Uh-huh.
So it's
The
built
most, the biggest, the yeah.
Saturn is built
Uh-huh.
into the language itself. We can't get away from it because when we want to establish the limit, we just throw an ST on it.
This is I mean, this is your Gemini rising etymologist at work. I love this.
And of course, here's the
Right.
Saturn Satan. All right, I'm going to stop my screen share.
That
I
was
just
amazing.
the pictures of seeing, you know, that ST, and I remember that I kind of came across this whole concept um, as my daughter, who was a Mercury Neptune conjunction on her ascendant. For those people who are not astrologers, Mercury is the planet of communication, and Neptune is the planet of music, of imagination, of dreams. And my daughter, when she was a baby, she would sing. I mean, she would
Oh,
go,
wow.
"Hey, oh, yeah, yeah," no words.
Wow.
But if I walked into the room, it would be, well, you know, it was duh,
Huh.
duh. And I realized that cavemen, before they spoke, they probably talked about going to the hunt. What is a da da? You know, that's it's there's a sound that we make, and I was really excited when I figured this out or came across it or made it up. I don't know, but whenever I have a new theory, which I have way too many, I
You wouldn't be
always
an
run them by
Aries Sun Cardinal heavy chart without that, would you?
I
Love
always
that.
run them by Rob Hand. Now, for those of you who are not astrologers, I refer to Rob Hand as the academic dean of astrology on the planet. You know, he's a smart boy. He has
Yes.
a PhD. He has a PhD in ancient history, and he translates from a number of languages. You know, Latin, some Greek. And I ran this by Rob, and Rob said in his very typically way, he says, "My God, Levine, you've stumbled upon a theory of natural evolution of language." Now that's Mercury and Sagittarius talking, making something sound more important than maybe it is. But
That's
um,
pretty seismic there. I like this.
and there are other planetary associations that we're not going to go into now because our topic is Saturn, and Saturn really likes it when you restrict stuff, when you crystallize one idea, when you stay on topic, when you're stable. Saturn doesn't like it when
Just
you're
so
all over.
hard sometimes,
Sometimes it is. So here's the thing that we want to know, though, about looking at the year 2020 is that Saturn is about a 30-year cycle. It's 29 and a half years, but about 30 years. And because Saturn goes around the zodiac, around the sun in 30 years, in that amount of time, Pluto, which is the farthest out of the regular planets we astrologers use, Pluto's moved on a little bit. So Saturn goes around in 30 years, and then it takes about another 3 to 5 or 8 years for it to catch up to Pluto again. Just like the moon catches up with the sun once a moon, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what a month is,
Mm-hmm.
that the new moons, which is the moon catching up to the sun, that becomes the keeper of the time. That's the origination of what a month or a month is. Now, by the same token, Saturn catches up to Pluto 3 times a century.
Right.
I call it waltz time for civilization, because that beat of the 1, 2, 3 every 100 years and their oppositions,
Ah.
that would be like the full moon, 1 and 2 and 3. It's like a Strauss waltz.
I can see
What
it.
happens? What happens is that this defines Saturn is the limit. Saturn is the outward circumference. You can't go beyond it. In fact, William Blake said you can't use logic to go to imagination. You, as long as you're using logic, you're still within the realms of the God, your reason.
Mm.
That it's a leap outside to go into the dream realm or in the imagination realm. All right. So Pluto, which is the slowest moving of the regular planets most of us astrologers use, is about transformation. It's about death and rebirth. It's about all the hidden parts of the cycle because it's a 250 year, actually 244 years.
48
But
is,
but
yeah. Mhm.
because of that, we never get to experience a whole cycle. So Pluto is largely mysterious and unknown. It's about transformation. It's the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. How does that happen? It happens in the dark. We don't know. All right. So every 33 to 38 years, depending on how fast Pluto is going, Saturn catches up to Pluto, and the boundaries of Saturn go through transformation.
Mm.
And boundaries don't like to be transformed.
No, they
So
do.
here's what happens. In 1914, Saturn and Pluto were at their new moon phase. They were lined up like at the same place within 5 days of World War I starting.
Right.
At the next opposition in 1931, this was the United States was deep in depression, and fascism was rising all over the world. The Japanese invaded China. You had the rise of Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and that was all at the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 1931. In 1947, at the next conjunction, um, within 5 days of the actual conjunction, Great Britain gives India its independence.
Right.
And we learned how cool was that? No shots were fired. It was all peaceful. But somehow they forgot to tell us that 500,000 people were killed as the borders between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. Again, we have transformation and borders. Half a
Right.
million people were killed. Um, and then in 1965 was the next opposition, revolution all over the planet. This is, of course, also tied to the Uranus Pluto conjunction, which is even a deeper rhythm. So the 60s, rock and roll, I mean, major. But also the war in Vietnam from the United States' point of view. At the next conjunction, 1982, it was kind of, first of all, that was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon was in 82.
Mm. Hmm.
But also, it was the only 20th century war between a colonial power, in this case England, and a colony, in this case Argentina. The Falkland Islands War was in
Right.
1982.
Okay.
Now, it wasn't a big deal on our map, but bombs were dropped and people were killed, and it was a real war, and it was a colonial war. And then at the next opposition was in the fall of 2001. We have the bombing of the Pentagon and the World Trade Tower. However, you put that together in your mind, that's another rabbit hole we're not going down. But the event itself was a significant event.
And
That was
shocking and
the
unexpected past
all of that.
Saturns, you know.
But but again, it was the rubbing up of boundaries. In this case, the Christian and Muslim, in effect, even though it played out politically in the United States. I mean, the Crusades were all timed on years of Saturn Pluto conjunctions, oppositions. The Arabs invaded Spain on the year of a Saturn conjunction. And 5 centuries later, they were kicked out of Spain. It became Catholic again. But that year was a Saturn Pluto conjunction again. And so, what does that mean? Right now, Saturn and Pluto are inching together. They will be exactly together the middle of January, January 12th, give or take a day, depending on where you are on the planet. But the impact of these conjunctions and oppositions are not one day or 1 week or 1 month. They are a year coming and a year going. And we are in that period of time, what we have in the United States with the phenomenon of the country being taken down some black road, by a would-be king or dictator. That same scenario is being played out in England with Brexit, in
Right.
Venezuela, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Indonesia, well, Hong Kong.
Oh, right.
Was given its Hong Kong was given its freedom from China in 1898 at the Saturn-Pluto opposition.
Wow. Huh.
And these events come around. Here's just one train of thought, and then we'll get off this subject. But in 1898, that was the year the World Zionist Organization was founded. And it was also the year that Gandhi spent in jail in South Africa getting freedom from apartheid for the Indians in
Mm,
South Africa. All right, 1898. 1914, we already talked about, that was World War I. But as part of that, Lawrence of Arabia went in through the Arab lands and basically got the Arabs to fight on the side of the Allies, with the promise that if the Allies won the war, they would protect the Arabs from the Turks, the Ottomans, forever, from external rule. That was 1914. Now, in 1931, because the World Zionist Organization was founded in 1898 at the opposition, Jews from all over the world are flooding into Israel.
right.
However,
Including my father.
however, England had signed a treaty saying that they would protect Palestine from foreign rule, which was kind of crazy. And 1931, at the Saturn-Pluto opposition, is the opening of the book and the movie Exodus. Basically, Britain declares martial law in Palestine because they don't know what to do.
Huh.
I mean, there's no solution. That's 1931. In 1947, the UN is founded in 46. And by 48, Israel is founded and Palestine disappears. Now, I'm not judging right or wrong here. I'm just stating the absolute facts
This
as
is
we
what
know them.
happens, these boundaries of Saturn, and then Pluto can make
All
them
right.
invisible
So,
or shift or transformed.
so,
Huh.
so we have Gandhi. We have Gandhi in jail in 1898 at the opposition. Oh, we have Gandhi in jail
Very
again in
Plutonian.
1931. Huh?
Oh, I said very Plutonian too, being in
And
jail. Yeah.
in 1931 at the Saturn Pluto opposition, Gandhi is in jail the year again because he led the Salt March, which was getting the Indians to boil seawater, make salt, so they didn't have to pay the Brits salt tax. So he ended up in jail in 1931 again. In 1947, at the conjunction that disappeared Palestine and created Israel, at that same conjunction, Gandhi got freedom for India. But here's where it gets bizarre, because in 1982, at the following conjunction, the movie Gandhi came out. Who
What?
could make it up
I
like this?
know. And it's like, isn't
It's
that the
so the threads somehow, it's like taking a client and looking at what happened to that client when Saturn conjuncted their natal moon and then squared it and then opposed it and then squared it and then conjuncted it again, and you see that there's a theme that it might as well be the same damn event through different age eyes.
huh.
And the same thing happens on this cultural level, that the planets don't only affect us individually, that culturally there is some sort of memory that create these brush fires that come up again and again and again and
And the
again. And
storyline
we
just keeps threading through. Yeah.
we are there now in spades, because we had this opening in the 1960s from the Uranus Pluto conjunction with Saturn in opposition. And then we had in 2012 to 2015, we had the Saturn Pluto square, which is the awakening of what happened back in the 60s. So issues like gender issues, drug issues, racial, civil rights issues, power broking, riots in the streets, ecology, all these things that never really went away were all of a sudden back, and it was like awakening and opening. And this Saturn Pluto conjunction that we're in now is coming on the tail end of that. And there's something else that's occurred that's non-astrological, but it's changed astrology for everyone on the planet. And what it is it's the instantaneous feedback of social media.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you were living under a let's say a Uranus Neptune conjunction that was transforming the world, you'd only know about, if it was back in, let's say, 1812, which there was an opposition, you would only know about what was going on your street corner. You wouldn't know that what was going on your street corner was also going on in street corners in Rome and Berlin and Prague and
Right.
Paris. You wouldn't know that. And now, not only do we know that, it gets captured on video because
Live
everyone has video
streamed.
cameras.
Yeah,
And we
exactly.
get to see it again and again and again and again. So I think we've entered into a period of time that what's happening is we're getting, and I made this word up, it's my word, we're getting cosmic feedback loops.
Mm-hmm.
Just like taking sound and amping it up and creating distortions that have their own level of being. By doing what we're doing, we're giving these low frequency, long-term cycles feedback that's making them even more powerful, which is why this Saturn Pluto conjunction is so urgent, so powerful. No, anyone who says they know what's going to happen doesn't. Period.
Right.
Because we're new. Matter of fact, if you see an astrologer who says this is what's going to happen, get the hell out of there, because they don't know what's happening. They just have a map. You know, a map of Bali or of New York State does not tell you where you're going. It just tells you where things are. An
Right.
astrology map doesn't tell you what's going to happen. It just tells you when it's going to happen.
Exactly. This
Anyhow,
cycle may repeat itself, ladies and gentlemen. You have no idea how. Fasten your seatbelt. And I think the cosmic feedback loops are even reverberating louder because of the social media echo chambers that are created. Because now you would actually think, well, oh, we used to have this idea of, at least in my mind, I thought we had this idea of morality. This is right. You don't bully people. You don't say those things. And it's almost this Plutonian thing has been exposed of everyone's shadow, where it's like, no, some people are actually fine with that. It's like, where have our
what you just
boundaries
said,
gone,
what you just said goes right back to that thing that we started with, and that is the boundary between fact and fiction, between real and unreal, and between good and evil is simply not the same boundary it once was. In fact, this whole fake news thing,
Yeah.
we've slipped through an eye of a needle, and I don't know that we'll ever recover one reality. I think that this is a state that we now live in, and it's very crazy. I mean, it is crazy. It's
Yeah.
clinically
We
crazy.
we spent the last couple of years wringing our hands about, oh no, how can you like lie blatantly and still get away with that? But it's like, it has almost become that
It's
the
like, who
truth
cares?
is no longer right. It's like, I mean, how do you think Saturn and Pluto meeting up will create will have any sort of impact on that? I mean, I know we can't fully predict, but I mean, we're
Well,
kind of already together so much that, yeah.
yeah, the answer is it would be nice. The truth of the matter is that I don't know that we can get this genie back into the bottle.
Mm, mm-hmm.
That, I mean, and that's not an astrological take. That's just a, you know, huh. I mean, I think as much as I love astrology, there are other things that inform my astrology, and one of them is the work of Marshall Mcluhan,
Mm,
who many people know as a media guru of the 1960s, 70s. His very famous book was called "The Medium is the Massage" or "The Medium is the Message,"
mm,
and it was a James Joycean play on the word. And basically, McLuhan, one of his points was, it doesn't matter what we're watching on TV. The fact that TV is delivering, vibrations is changing things. The
Oh,
medium is the message.
I see. So the internet
And
is that medium, social media is the medium, and it's truly
the
that.
content that we get all excited about content, but content is secondary to what the medium is. Now, the other thing that Mcluhan claimed is that all technology was biological and that it was externalized for social use. And I'm going to do this very quickly, but this is like an amazing another rabbit hole.
I'm
But
diving
for
in.
example, for example, houses are a technology, but they're really the extension of our skin. A camera is the extension of our eye. A
Okay,
wheel is a rotary foot. Everything in technology happens biologically, but then we extend it.
I
Now,
get that. Yes.
McLuhan said, now, in electricity, McLuhan claimed back in the early 60s, was basically the externalization of our nervous system, because our nervous system is electrical. And this was the key claim, the reason why we moved from a language society.
Sound issue here. So we'll have to do a little, let me, okay. Let it pass for a sec. We'll just start over with electricity in a minute as soon as this, as soon as the frogs of the internet pass. Okay, still chirping a little there. Unmute. You can hear me clearly. Yeah?
Now I can.
Still doing it on you. Yeah, let's see. I'm going to pause the recording.
So Marshall McLuhan claimed that the electronic media was causing a retribalization. So Marshall McLuhan claimed that the electronic media, from radio to TV to even computers, was externalizing our nervous system. And that we now have, and he coined this word, we've flipped out. In other words, our
Wow.
nervous system that used to be inside of us is now the World Wide Web, and we are running around inside of a greater brain.
Is that
Now,
why anxiety and everyone's like, oh, I'm logged in, I'm logged out, I don't know where to put my energy, my attention.
So
Yeah.
my theory is that we've flipped out and this greater brain has gone schizophrenic. Now, no, and I mean this not as a joke, because with neurosis, you can talk your way back. With neurosis, you can solve the issues and you can manage or even cure a neurosis. With schizophrenic, you put the two characters side by side, the two facets of the personality, and there's no communication. They can't talk. And that's what's happening on the planet, between whether you call it fundamentalism, liberalism, whether you call it right wing, left wing, whether you call it, I mean, there's all the different names, but you put these two people together from these two different points of view, and the more they talk, the greater the tension becomes.
It is
And there's
almost a
only
schizophrenic dialogue, and it's giving everyone
exactly.
cognitive dissonance that they can't get past.
And there's only one way to resolve tension that doesn't resolve by communication, and that is Uranus.
In
Because
Taurus, thank goodness.
that's what Uranus's job is. Uranus's job is to resolve tensions that can't be resolved. You know, when we bury stuff, I often say that Uranus has one job, and it's the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. Lightning. When lightning strikes, in that 1 second, the opposite polarity, electrical, is resolved for that 1 second. But we're in a crazy state. In 2020, we'll see some resolution. Where it'll go, I don't know. But between the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which will be playing, even though it's exact on January 12th, it'll be playing with us all year because of the transformations that are still needing to be resolved from the realities that are bumping up against each other now. And then, of course, the year culminates with the once every 20-year Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And that's another whole story. But 2020 is couched in between these two Saturnian events, Saturn-Pluto and Saturn-Jupiter. And of course, Saturn changes and Jupiter change signs from Capricorn into Aquarius. But in ancient astrology, both Capricorn and Aquarius are related to Saturn. So
Yeah.
Saturn's still at home. So it's going to be a very powerful year for everyone. And my words of wisdom to everyone is to, keep breathing, and to see who's around you, because that's your family. you know,
Mm.
and to be joyous, to regardless of, I mean, the Hopi prophecy says the river is running fast and the river will find the sea. And it says that he who holds on to the shore will be torn asunder. Push away from the shore out into the middle where the river is moving the fastest,
Wow.
and keep your head above water. Look around, see who's there. This is your new family.
Mm.
Celebrate,
Mm.
celebrate. And most importantly, do not take anything personally, because as soon as you do, your spiritual development stops.
Wow.
And that's crazy to say from an astrologer, because our astrology is all about taking things personally. It's about the individual chart. And yet we find ourselves at a time in evolution where we have to just do whatever we need to do to get over our individual shit and figure out a way to not entertain the negativity. And I'm not saying we should be unrealistic. I'm
No.
saying that we need to see what's real and still find things to celebrate about with those who are nearby us. Those who
Well,
are
Saturn's move into Aquarius from March 21st to July 1st, and then again meeting up on, on the winter solstice, December 21st with Jupiter, I think is like pushing us to pay attention to the collective conscious, away from the Capricorn, mine, me and my, and I think there's no way that it won't be just a little bit of a psychedelic experience. And as you're talking about Uranus, I'm thinking about how it is in this very tactile position of Taurus. And I'm hearing a lot of people, I mean, even just seeing you in Bali, like people really wanting to feel grounded. I've been over and over, they've been saying that, and wanting more analog touch, sixth sense experiences. Are you finding that, or do you think Uranus
No,
might bring that back a bit?
I think it might, but Uranus in Taurus has one, I don't say a problem, but Uranus in Taurus doesn't like change.
Yeah.
And Uranus is
Oh.
about change. And so the difficulty with Uranus in Taurus is that we are in a time of great change. And when Uranus was in Aries, every little thing changed us, because everyone, didn't matter what you believed, it changed. But now with Uranus and Taurus, it's going to take some earthquakes. And I don't mean that physically, I mean metaphysically. It's going to take some real earthquakes to shatter the granite, the solidity of Taurus. Because Uranus and Taurus doesn't give it up very easily. When Uranus goes into Gemini, there it'll give it up very easily. There the change will happen quite rapidly. But while Uranus and Taurus, I think we're going to move through this
2025, yeah.
about that.
April
And until
2025.
then, I think we're going to move through it pretty slowly. However, there's going to be huge abrupt shifts that whether you wanted to change or not, it's done. You're
And all
somewhere
the
else.
earth, I mean, the earth is already doing that, climate change or crisis, whatever you want to call it. And well, how does Saturn, in your view, when it meets up with one of the inner planet, of Jupiter, how do you think it, that's more inner than it, like, how does that mesh, as opposed to, like, where does the border happen with Saturn and Jupiter?
Well, with Saturn and Jupiter, I think it does, to some extent, reset the boundaries.
Ah.
People don't realize, but our calendar is astrologically timed to Saturn-Jupiter cycle, because Saturn and Jupiter make their new moon, their conjunction, every 20 years, 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980, 2001, actually it was, but now back to 2020. And then the full moon phases, the oppositions, were 19, 10, 30, 50, 70,
I
90,
actually didn't realize that. Wow. Okay. Huh.
and if you think about it, the decades have alternating expansion and contractions associated. I mean, the 20s were expansive, the roaring 20s, the 30s were contractive, the 40s World War expansive, the 50s were contractive, the 60s psychedelic were expansive, the 70s were contractive, the 80s were expansive, the 90s were, and so on. And so it's the Jupiter Saturn cycle is a little bit of the inhale exhale process over the course of decades.
Yeah. And so when they're an opposition, is it more expansive or contractive, do you think? More
Well, right now they're obviously coming into
conjunction.
conjunction,
Uh-huh.
and we're basically from conjunction on is expansive. We've been in a contractive decade.
Does feel, even though we've had huge technological advances, that there's been this like return to this very, it's like morality and like seeing some very entrenched
How about calling it false morality?
Okay, yeah, conservatism and fear mongering and what have you. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What is reality, anyways? Really, right?
Well,
Let's ask Saturn. He knows.
well, actually, he doesn't. He used to know. In horoscope symbols, I think Rob Hand wrote that maybe in the early 70s, I'm thinking. He wrote, and I'm going to get this as close as I can, but it's not exact wording. He wrote, we used to believe, we used to think that Saturn was reality and Neptune is illusion. However, we've come to realize that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion there was one.
Well, nowadays it's not a big deal. To read a book by a channeled author, channeled from some 30,000-year-old entity and just like take that more seriously than,
Well, I've said many times that when I grew up, I've always been a writer and always loved reading. And when I grew up, the primary classification of any written material was fiction and nonfiction. However, most of what I and most of the people I know read these days is something in between.
Yeah. And that includes Instagram. So, well, are there any parting words on Saturn you want to share with us? I like what you said, keep your head above water, and the people who are around you are your family. It's actually a 4-year numerology. So for universal year, which really is all about who's your family, who are your anchors, how do you ground yourself? So that does reverberate in other mystical mediums too. So, yeah.
I don't know that I have any other words of wisdom at this point in time. I will again tomorrow.
Of course. Well, you've given us so many downloads. I'm never going to type ST again without thinking of, that.
So
Well,
a quick little personal story, and that is that my immediate nuclear family, and having a kid growing up in that family, there were words that Dad created that became words, and one of them was "st." It was a word by itself.
stuff.
It was like, "Are we leaving at 8 o'clock, Dad?" "St." I mean, just meant Saturn. It meant that was the limit.
I love it. Well, Saturn, is definitely going to show its limitations this year, but maybe not. Maybe be challenged in those as well. So it's anyone's guess, but I'm glad we're having this conversation. So, this doesn't necessarily mean that, there's going to be a giant war, but there already are wars happening that we don't know about or that we don't really read about.
But there are wars. I mean, again, think about what's going on, in Syria, in Afghanistan,
right?
in Iraq.
They're happening at our own border,
That's right. I mean, there are wars that are being fought right now. And
Yeah, Saturn, everyone, Saturn and Pluto. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing eclipse moment in Singapore. I don't know if you mentioned that at the top or not, but you're heading to Singapore to see the annular eclipse on the 26th and 27th there, right?
I've seen two total eclipses. One was a cloudy sky, but it was amazing, and the other was an absolute clear sky, and it was more amazing. But I've never seen an annular eclipse. You know, the moon gets bigger and smaller as it gets closer or further away to the Earth. A supermoon is a full moon when it's really close to the Earth. Well, this is the opposite of the supermoon. It's a moon that's far away at its apogee, away from
The
the Earth,
micro moon, I've heard it called.
and
Yeah.
and as such, at totality, it's not. It doesn't cover the sun completely. You don't just see the corona. You actually get a ring, and in Latin, the word annulus means a ring.
And it's like a
And
ring
so,
of fire kind of, I've heard it called too, right?
so we'll see. I will have my cameras with me, and if it's photographable, I got great photographs on the eclipse the Leo eclipse a couple of years
Oh
ago.
my God,
Um,
amazing.
but we'll see.
All right.
I'm in.
Well, where can people check you out on stariq.com?
Yeah,
And
probably the best place these days to see what I'm up to, and to, if you want to, both get, I have monthly free videos, and I have a variety of other videos, both for teaching astrology and just, I do these sometimes, I think these occasional, I call them cosmic quickies that are like 10 to 15 minutes long, and they're just zaps on different things. And I think we're offering a couple of those cosmic quickies to people who sign up, actually.
awesome.
But the place to find me
Cosmic
is
quickies. I love it.
the cosmic quickies are no good unless you also have longer ones
Yeah.
sometimes. Okay.
A true
Um,
zodiacal releasing, but sorry.
but, wow. The place to find me, though, if anyone is still listening,
Don't get a
is
Sagittarius started on the Borscht Belt humor. It goes off the rails, right? Yeah.
what's a rail?
That's
Okay, the place to find me there, or find me, is at Patreon. That's Patreon, like patron with an E. So it's www.patreon.com/Rick Levine.
awesome.
Patreon.com/Rick Levine. And that will get you to a page that basically tells you what I'm up to, and if there's things you can get for free, and there's things you can get if you have a lot of money and you want to throw at me.
Well worth it. He is a master and a wizard, and I am so honored that you did this with us. So,
And I'm so pleased that we did it together rather than me just talking into a computer for an hour by myself. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very
yeah,
much.
it's the age,
Yeah.
the Aquarian age. We got to commune a little more and actually talk to each other instead of at each other. See, we're already dissolving those boundaries right now. So, well, thanks so much. Have an amazing new year, and we will see more of you in 2020. Bye, Rick.
Yay.
Bye. Mwah.